All right, Raren. So today we are going to be looking at some very old Yu-Gi-Oh cards. I know your Yu-Gi-Oh knowledge probably stops at about 2019, 2020 era. So this will be a nice glimpse and a nice change of pace for you because, spoiler, a lot of these cards only have like 1 or 2 lines of text. So how are you feeling about your confidence in evaluating cards?
Honestly, if it's 2 lines of text, I'll be okay. Yeah, actually, you know what? I almost wish I did the reverse because I started with modern Yu-Gi-Oh. I started with modern Yu-Gi-Oh, and basically from what I understand from modern Yu-Gi-Oh is if the card does something really good and it has a lot of words, it's usually really strong. So now that we're at 2 sentences, that's tough. I do know that Pot of Greed is really good.
Okay, that's a good starting point. That's a good starting point. You also probably know that card's banned. So spoiler alert, that's not on this list. I have to make it a little bit more complex for you. But I do have some cards on here. It's going to be escalating complexity. We're going to start with some basic ones, and we're going to get a little bit more difficult towards the end. We're going to really test your knowledge as a Yu-Gi-Oh Hearthstone player. So you ready? All right, let's start off with one of the most basic cards from actually, I believe this was the 3rd set of Yu-Gi-Oh. Why don't you go ahead and give this one a read?
I'm gonna you got me so nervous. Hold on. All right, confiscation. Pay 1,000 life. Look at your opponent's hand, select 1 card among them, and discard it to your graveyard. Okay, so just so I'm clear, we're not only am I evaluating if this card is good, we're evaluating whether or not it is banned.
Yes, you're deciding whether basically all of the above. You're deciding if it's good or not, if it's banned currently, and then also if you want to delve into why you think it is or is not banned.
Pay 1,000 life points, look at your opponent's hand, select 1 card among them, and discard it to the graveyard.
What are your initial thoughts on this one?
See, I'm trying to think of this as like a Hearthstone card. Would I pay 1 card to do that, and I get to look at their hand as well? That's Would you pay? So what is that in Hearthstone? Hearthstone, you get 30 life. So this is 1/8 of your life. So that would be what? You pay 4? Would you pay 4 or 5 life to look at your opponent's hand and rip a card out? Yeah, I think I would, to be honest. That seems really good. I'm trying to think of like, it'd probably go in Priest. If it went in Priest, you could heal it back up anyways. So like, that's not even that bad.
Are there any Hearthstone equivalent cards like this that you can think of? I know that Priest has like Thought Steal, I think is the card.
Okay, without spoiling videos for you, yes. There are cards that allow you to interact with your opponent's hand, and you actually might see one of those later today.
That's very funny. That's very funny.
My video is perfect for you. I can't wait to show it to you. Okay, so I think in 19, like this is like early.
This is 2002. This was released. This is one of the first Yu-Gi-Oh sets ever.
Yeah, I'm trying to. So like the card quality back in the day was probably not nearly as good as it is now. And usually, I don't know, you probably have a couple good cards. I wouldn't say that your average deck in the older days at Yu-Gi-Oh were like broken. I have no idea.
Pot of Greed was legal back then, so keep that in mind.
That makes me think that this is worse then. Unless you're just ripping the Pot of Greed from their hand and be like I don't know. It's so difficult because, can I ask you one question if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure.
What was the average game length in old Yu-Gi-Oh? Actually, you don't even have to answer that because we did that video a little bit ago, but that wasn't like, I guess, full efficient decks. Those were like drafting decks. So the gameplay is probably faster. Those games lasted quite a while though. It feels like for Yu-Gi-Oh time. So yeah, if you don't mind, how long would the average game of Yu-Gi-Oh last?
I think it's tough. I think it would probably go on for about as long as when we did our draft episode. You know, you can watch that video. I think it would probably go on for about as long as those duels went. Sometimes it'd be quicker. I mean, I would say it's just like your average card game length, let's say. Pot of Greed was legal.
See, that's really tough because I think at that, like, if games lasted that long, it felt like often we would run out of cards, or at least I would. I think you had actually cards.
Well, let's start with this. Do you think this is a good card?
In theory, yes. In Yu-Gi-Oh, I think it's worse than it is in Hearthstone. Like, it's so tough. Okay, like, the translation from Hearthstone to Yu-Gi-Oh is rough because you guys don't have mana. So like theoretically speaking, like this is a fine card. Because if I remember the rules correctly, you could play a spell card, like unique spell once per turn.
You could play as many spell cards as you want in a turn, as long as it doesn't say. So I'll give you a bit of a spoiler here. There's no, later on, Yu-Gi-Oh started putting once per turn clauses on cards. That wasn't really as much of a thing back in the day.
Yeah, I was thinking about like the Sword Soul deck. Like it can only do like some of those spells once per turn, if not all of them. So that makes a lot of sense. Okay. So you can play multiple of these in one turn and then rip your opponent's hand?
Hypothetically.
No, I don't think this card's very good. I think it can be very good. Like if I'm thinking of it from like Hearthstone, often those cards can be good, but a lot of the times they just miss. The fact that you can look at your opponent's hand, though, is really interesting. Hearthstone's never had that. Hearthstone
really? There's no effect to look at your opponent's hand in Hearthstone.
Hearthstone has either see 1 card or see 3 cards because, like, you know, Discover is often how they do it. because I guess they don't have the UI system for like showing your whole hand, which often ends up being like, is 3 cards really worth the information, et cetera, which means it's not very that great. So I'm going to go with like, this card's okay, but it's not like amazing. And I doubt it was banned.
So this card is banned, and it has been banned for 20 years. So let me give you some context. So you sort of were on the right track with when you're asking about the once per turn clause. So as you notice, there is no once per turn clause on this card.
Yeah.
So hypothetically, on release, before, I will say this card was limited very quickly, so you could only play 1 copy of it. Before that, you were allowed to hypothetically play 3 copies of this card. And by doing so, you mentioned as well with Hearthstone how Hearthstone has mana and Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't. Yu-Gi-Oh, the cards are the resource, essentially. And so, not only do you get to rip basically the best card out of your opponent's hand, having hand knowledge in Yu-Gi-Oh has proven to be time and time again one of the most absolutely just disgusting, devastating mechanics ever, because you can basically just foresee your opponent's entire turn and the next several turns after that just based on every single card they have in their hand. And so confiscation, there are other cards that are also hand-ripping cards, as we call them. There's actually something known as the unholy trinity of hand-ripping cards, because they all basically do this, where you look at your opponent's hand and rip a card, either send it to the grave, shuffle it back into the deck, or one of them actually just discards 2 cards out of your opponent's hand for 1, which is even crazier. All of those cards have actually been banned for 20 plus years. So
yeah, see, you say it's like really good at Yu-Gi-Oh, but in Hearthstone, it's never actually been that good. Like it's surprising how little like knowing your hand or your opponent's hand is like really impacting the game.
Let me show you the most recent example of a hand knowledge card that got banned. You're going to look at this card. First of all, this is one of the ugliest artworks of a card ever made. But also, you're going to read this. This is one of the worst like iterations, and this also got banned. So read this one for me.
It's funny, just say the art and it actually looks atrocious. Pointer of the Red Lotus. Pay 2,000 life points and reveal your entire hand. Look at your opponent's hand and banish 1 card from their hand until your opponent's next end phase. This is bad, right?
This is banned too. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. So this is actually a card that was banned more recently, and you have modern knowledge here. So the idea here was, let's take Sword Soul as a deck that you understand. The idea behind why this card is banned is that you could look at your opponent's hand after you do your turn, set up your board, whatever, take a look at what they have, and if they have any card that can out your board, you just get rid of that card. It doesn't matter if it's only until the end of the next end phase or whatever, because you're probably just going to win on the following turn because Yu-Gi-Oh's so fast-paced now. So it got so bad that everyone was side decking multiple copies of a pointer, and then they would just bring it in when they knew they were going first, set up a board. Oh, look, you have evenly matched, you have Dark Ruler, whatever. I'm just going to take that out. Now I win the game effectively. So people are this down bad to find hand ripping cards that we played this shit.
Oh, you know what, dude? I have to really remember that there's like phases in Yu-Gi-Oh. That's like another huge thing I didn't even consider, because like you get to do your turn, go into the battle phase, and then you get to play more cards after, right? So
correct. Yes.
Yeah. So
that's like Magic.
The way that you just said that like is actually insane, because then you look at your opponent's hand and be like, oh, this card's gonna ruin my entire board. All right, fuck that card. And then yeah, I understand. That kind of opened me up a little bit, realizing like what the phases are like, because that matters a ton. Like that's actually such a big deal. Okay.
It's interesting too, because Magic has like Thought Seize, which lets you basically do what Confiscation does, but in Magic, it's like the games progress typically a lot longer than Yu-Gi-Oh games do. So it's like, okay, they know my hand, but I'm going to probably draw a whole new hand by the time the game's over. So the knowledge slowly goes away.
Maybe that's why in Yu-Gi-Oh it's such a bigger deal, because in Hearthstone and Magic, they are both longer games. So like knowing your hand is like almost irrelevant.
Right, especially as the game got faster and faster. Yeah, what do you think about this card though? What do you think about this card?
Okay, summon limit. Neither player can summon more than 2 times per turn. And just so I'm clear, like this counts as normal summoning and special summoning and like all of that.
Okay. Summon encompasses all summoning. Correct.
That's a really interesting effect.
Is there anything like this in Hearthstone that like limits the amount of cards that can be played per turn?
No.
Interesting. They probably learned from Yu-Gi-Oh that those cards aren't fun.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think from a Hearthstone's perspective, especially because I can't like do anything like you're doing your turn, they don't want to limit you majority of the time. Like tech cards are very sparingly like created, and if they're created, they're often not like great for tempo or anything like that. So this seems very awful to play with. That being said, I almost feel like it's necessary evil in Yu-Gi-Oh to stop certain decks.
Right, exactly.
So like it's a weird like trade-off. I don't know if this is good though. Neither player, because it stops you. But again, this is the concept of like you could do your full turn, then play this, and then your opponent's like sitting there crying. And you can play this on your opponent's turn if you need to.
It is a trap card. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's good. Banned? I don't know if it's banned. I'm gonna have to ask you a question after this. After you tell me whether or not. I don't think it's banned. I think it's good. I think it's good, but not banned.
Final answer?
Yeah, final answer.
Okay, so this card's banned. So you were right on the money, though. I sort of led you down this route with a pointer, which was kind of the intention. But so summon limit, it's just like you said. You can set up your whole board, and then on your opponent's turn, one thing that this card is a bit misleading with is that what makes it even more deceptively powerful is that your opponent can conduct 2 summons, and then you flip summon limit, and now immediately they can't summon any further because the game has recognized that you've already summoned twice. So you don't have to preemptively flip this card in order.
Okay.
Right, exactly. So it already knows that you've summoned twice. So now you just cannot summon for the rest of the turn. So that's one thing that makes this card especially powerful. But what's even crazier about this card is that people figured out ways to search this card because it's not like part of an archetype. It's a generic card. People found ways to search this card and basically preemptively set it to their field as part of their like turn 1 combo. So they would do their combo with a bunch of like negates like Baron and stuff and then set summon limit at the end of their combo and be like, go ahead. So now not only can they only summon twice, you have a Baron or some other like boss monster with a negate that can protect the summon limit to make it so that your opponent can't crack it to be able to get you on the crackback.
Yeah, okay, I can understand why that's... Here's a question for you. Is this card stronger than Maxi?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
So I don't know if I've had this discussion with you, but this is a good time because this kind of is like almost the reverse of it because Maxi wants you to summon more stuff so we get more resources. Why do you think Maxi is not banned? What's the Japanese league called? I forget what it is. It's legal
the OCG.
There. Yeah, so it's legal in the OCG, which means it's legal in Master Duel, right? Why do you think that's the case?
Honestly, because it's legal in the OCG, and I'm pretty sure Konami Japan runs Master Duel, that it's legal for them as well. There's very conflicting philosophies on Maxi in that Maxi, for at least Japan's purposes, right? They believe by having that card in the format, it prevents like the crazy wombo combo decks from being able to go completely unchecked, even though there are other hand traps in the game like Ash Blossom, you know, Infinite Impermanence, etc., to be able to slow your opponent down turn 1. Maxi is sort of like the ultimate check in that regard. But even if you talk with people in the OCG, and I've been to Asia a couple times now, and I've actually gotten to have conversations with people in the OCG, they hate it just as much, but it's legal, so they have to deal with it. So they get the short end of the stick because they're just stuck with it. And it's, I think the card has like a 94% play rate with the statistics on Master Duel, and they keep it legal for some reason that is... who the fuck knows? Like it's baffling.
Yeah, it's interesting. The only reason I asked that question is because if this card is banned for that reason, I think it's really awkward that Maxi isn't banned for the reverse reason. Which is
well, I mean, it is for the TCG, so
yeah, I guess that's fair.
At least for now. At least for now, we'll see. It's getting reprinted, so everyone's on edge right now. Anyway, we're not here to talk about Maxi. We're here to talk about other cards that you were 0 for 2 so far, but I believe in you. I believe you'll be able to get this one. This should be an easy one,
dude. Okay, so this one actually, I don't know this card. It's been years, but I think I used to own this card. I remember the art.
I wouldn't be surprised. This was in one of the like original starter decks, so it would be pretty likely that you own this. Yeah.
Okay, change of heart. Select one monster in your opponent's side of the field. Take control of select a monster till the end phase of this turn. Can they attack?
It doesn't say they can't.
Okay. You have no idea how much I have to clarify this game.
That's fine. That's fine.
God, that seems really good too. I'm sure all these cards are very, very good. It just really comes down to like...
I had to make it tough for you.
Selecting one monster, especially during this era of Yu-Gi-Oh, is probably so insane. In the early days of Hearthstone, you probably remember this. They had Mind Control.
That's the 10 cost priest card, right?
Yeah, and Mind Control was the same concept, but you kept the minion. If you took a minion, it would have summoning sickness, so you can't attack with it immediately. And often the effect of like the battle cry, or the effect in this case for Yu-Gi-Oh, would be already used unless it's like a once per turn kind of thing. So it made it worse. You're just taking it for the tempo. Now, does tempo really matter in Yu-Gi-Oh? Now, I'm sure there's a lot of really good Yu-Gi-Oh monsters that have like a really good effect that you could utilize, whatever. But I don't know if this is a card that you want to take when you can put another card in, or just put like a good monster yourself. I don't know. It's so different. This is such a hard question to answer. Would you?
Well, do you think this is a good card? I guess you can start there.
Contextually, yes, it can be.
contextually. Like this is such a difficult one because I have no idea what monsters look like. Are we talking like Blue Eyes White Dragon is like the best thing in the game currently? Probably not.
Oh no, I mean we're talking about the cards that are in the game currently.
This is a card that also gets better throughout Hearthstone, throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's history. Like the better monsters there are, the better this becomes. So at some point they're like, maybe we should ban this. Does it really matter? Because you have to, if you're going second, then you can take it, and then your opponent has to be able to react to it, and sometimes they can't. I mean, I can see it being good. Sure, I can see it being good. Is it banned? I don't think so. I don't think so. There's so much
Final answer?
Okay, when you say it like that, I don't know if I want to say yes. Yeah. Good, but not bad.
Okay. You're on the board, Raren. You're on the board. So this card was banned forever. They actually just recently unbanned this card, which was actually insane for a lot of people because a lot of people just remember this card from childhood being like the game ender. It's like you said, it is contextual to what's on the board. You figured out that you are allowed to attack with the monster. Typically, you would just save this as one of your haymakers or as a way to like really just take back control of the game depending on like how you're playing. Now it's sort of used as a card for purposely like going second and using it as a way to break the opponent's board. Think about the fact that you could take your opponent's monster and then you could like synchro off with it. You could link with it. If it's like, I don't know, if it's like Baron or something, right? You could take the Baron and like now you have an Omni negate like to stop their stuff, although they probably negate Change of Heart. But I'm just trying to like give just random contextual examples. Right? Yeah. So basically, and again, this is an old card. There's no once per turn clause on this. So hypothetically, if this card was ever available in more than one copy, you could play multiple copies at once and like take everything on your opponent's board potentially and just like flip the game around or just like OTK them or whatever. So this is a card recently got unbanned. It's another just like, it's a good card. It's kind of just past the point now where I think or where a lot of people think that it's considered like bannable, if that makes sense. So I think you're right on with that one. I think you're right on.
This card got unbanned because there are just like other cards that are stronger than this that they were probably more worried about. So they're like, why is this on the ban list?
There are a few other like take control type cards. Another one is Mind Control, which is Change of Heart, but it has a lot more stipulations. For instance, you can't attack with the monster. You also can't tribute the monster either. And that card saw play. And so there's also Brain Control, which is Change of Heart, but you have to pay 800 life points. And it actually got errated, so now it has to be a monster that can be normal summoned. So you can't take anything from the extra deck. It has a lot more stipulations on it. So they errated that card, but then they brought back Change of Heart into the game. And Triple Tactics Talent also has an ability on it to take control of one of your opponent's monsters. But there's a condition on that, where Change of Heart doesn't have a condition. You just play it and take the card. I think just because there are other cards that have existed in the game that haven't broken the game, Konami saw that, okay, we can bring back Change of Heart. Like, it's probably fine. And it's exciting because it's a super old card that people remember playing with. Let's see if you can keep up your streak with another very basic card.
Hey, I remember this card too. Well, the art at least, because it's so weird looking.
It is.
It is. I don't even know. What is it, like a tornado? What is that word? Trinade?
Yeah, Trinade. It's like a giant tornado.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Or like a hurricane.
With a fucking huge ass face in it, man. Return all spells and trap cards on the field to the respective owner's hands. Oh my god. See, it's funny looking at these cards and like this year because I have all this context of like what actually is a good card in multiple games. And when I was a little kid looking at this card, I'm like, it's not Blue Eyes. Fuck this card. Why do I return all spells and trap cards on the field? I feel like this is really bad. Like, I don't know, because often if your opponent is playing the spells and trap cards, they're gonna probably counter this spell. Could you at least tell me in this time when it came out, at least, was there spells that would counter a spell or a trap card that would counter spells? Okay,
there was that, and there wasn't just one, there was several.
Okay, so this makes me think this was horrible. There's a card in Hearthstone called Vanish, which is way back in class, you might remember it, which is like return all minions.
Okay.
And your side as well. That's like the closest we got because you can't set traps and spells down.
Right, of course. Yeah.
And that card was very good because it was so much tempo taken away from your opponent. This is weird because your opponent can interact with the spell before it even has the effect, which makes me think it's really bad. Because I'd rather do something else, but let me try to work my way into this. Why would I think this is good? I guess you start, you do this as like the first spell, and then your opponent is gonna use a spell to counter this. And then you're like, haha, you played right into my spell card. Then you win because like they used the negate on that. Like that seems to be where I'm headed. I guess also You could use this before your attack phase after you have a bunch of minions, so your opponent just can't interact with this. Remind me, can your opponent play trap cards if they're not already set from their hand, if it's not their turn?
For the most part, no. I would say like there might be like 1 or 2 exceptions to that rule, but like for the 99% of cases, no.
Hold on, now I'm coping a little bit here. That would be the only use case I could think for this card, which makes me okay. I'm not gonna trick my mind into it. I think this is bad, and I don't think this is bad. I feel like the bigger problem with this card is that this is such a specific thing that often would just get negated, and then like you just have a dead card.
Final answer?
Final answer.
All right. Well, this card is banned.
Oh my god.
So here's an interesting thing about Giant Trunade. So there's a couple applications for this card. The first one you were actually figuring out and you're sort of cobbling it together, where that you can use this card to basically bounce all of your opponent's back row, right? And if they have something that they can use to negate that and protect their other back row, then that's good. But then it sort of baits out the negation for, you know, the rest of your plays to go off, potentially. But you could also fill that slot with any other card, right? It doesn't have to be this one specifically. However, if they don't have anything to stop Giant Trunade, now all of a sudden all the back row are back into their hand, and they're basically defenseless. So back in the day, what most people would do with this card is they would bounce away all the opponent's back row and then go for a big push for lethal, because there was really just... It's sort of like a Leroy Jenkins type card, if you will, where you clear the way and you bring your big lethal push and you just win because your opponent doesn't have any way to interact. Where this card is really abusable, though, is the fact that it returns stuff to both players' hands. There is another card in Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's called Harpy's Feather Duster. Harpy's Feather Duster says it destroys all spells and traps only your opponent controls, which on paper you think would be way better than this card, right? Giant Trunade, being able to bounce cards back to the hand, it also bounces your cards back to the hand. And a recurring theme, as you've seen so far, is cards not having once per turn clauses on them being abused. So, hypothetically, you could play a card that has an ability that sticks on the field, and then Giant Trunade the card back to your hand and use that ability again, etc., etc. Especially, you could just cycle that depending on how many copies of Giant Trunade that you have. So it's a very abusable card, which is why it has stayed banned for like 15, 20 years at this point.
Why do you guys play this game?
I don't know. Honestly, at this point, I don't even know anymore. But we might be revisiting Giant Trunade a little bit later. I don't want to spoil too much. This will be an interesting one. This will be a really interesting one for you to evaluate as a Hearthstone player. There's a bit more text on this card. We're going to start to add a little bit of text here, but let's see what you think of this.
Reasoning: your opponent declares a monster level, then pick up cards from the top of your deck until a monster that can be normal summoned is picked up. That monster is the same level as the one declared by your opponent. Send all picked up cards to the graveyard. If not, special summon the picked up monster and send the remaining cards to the graveyard. So if it equals it, you get nothing. If it doesn't, you get something.
Precisely. So in a vacuum, you play this card. I declare any monster level. You're going to mill cards until you hit a monster that can be normal summoned. If it's if I call that number, it goes to the graveyard. If not, you get to special summon it.
How good is that? Okay, so I've learned throughout my time in Yu-Gi-Oh! That the graveyard is actually really good for you majority of the time. So I'm trying to think of whether or not that is, I guess you get rid of spells and such, but is that really that bad? Then you also get the special summon something, which is like decent majority of the time I'm imagining, but you would probably only play this card as like a side deck kind of thing, right? I don't know why I don't know why you would main deck this without just, I guess like maybe it's you just know, like you know the metagame and it's really good. But majority of the time it feels like this is really bad. But I thought about that as for the last card, and now I'm questioning whether or not how you're going to use this card to break the game.
Don't you love these videos? They're so fun.
It's fun being the other person, okay? Like watching them be like, oh yeah, dude, like you're so stupid. How do you not know this card? So funny watching the footage back too, and they're just smirking to themselves because they know like, what an idiot. He doesn't see this combo. Are you serious? Instinctually, like even in Hearthstone, I don't know why you would play this, right? If you said like, here's a mana cost, and if it makes this minion, if you're the minion he draws the same, you just discard all those cards. Okay, hold on. Actually, now that I say it like that, that's kind of nuts. Hold on.
I like how that's how you were like.
Wait, circling. So if I say 5 mana and you don't draw 5 mana, well, but you would draw a minion much more often in a Hearthstone deck, depending. There are very specific decks in Hearthstone that are like only spells. So like if you put this, you just mill their whole deck and they lose. So that would be fun. But majority of the time they're gonna pull a minion, and if they pull a minion, you're not drawing that many cards. Maybe you put a couple good cards from their deck into the graveyard or into the abyss that is Hearthstone. I don't think that's that good. Maybe in like against an but even in an aggro deck, you'd be like, why are you doing this? You're just giving me a free summon majority of the time. I think this is bad. I really think this is bad.
Okay.
I don't think it's banned. I can't wait to let you tell me that this is banned and doing this stupid shit. But yeah, I think it's
Final answer?
Yeah.
Final answer?
Yeah.
All right. Well, congratulations. You got another point. Reasoning, for all intents and purposes, it's bad, but it's also been like limited before. So let me explain the context here. So you're putting it together. So reasoning is essentially a combo piece for some decks that are trying to do something unfair. Basically, you can build your deck in such a way where the reason you would play this card is to only have like one actual target you would want to summon, one or two, and everything else in your deck is either spell cards, trap cards, or monsters that cannot be normal summoned. What happens is if you reveal a monster that says can only be special summoned or cannot be normal summoned or whatever, it skips over it. So you can actually still mill monsters to the graveyard with this card with that in mind. What people typically tried to do with this card was find things that they could cheat out with this that people are just not going to expect that get a lot of high value. Alternatively, there's an entire archetype that came out much later on, a little bit before you started playing, where all of the monsters, except for one in the entire deck, can't be normal summoned. And so you could hypothetically mill like 20, 30 cards with reasoning. But like you said, the graveyard is very important in Yu-Gi-Oh! You're basically using the graveyard as your second hand, and you can just special summon the monsters out of the graveyard that you milled to the graveyard with this card. So like you don't even care if you missed whatever you called with reasoning, because you just got 20 cards in the graveyard, and now you can summon like 5 guys to the field and kill your opponent. That was never a part of like any like definitive like meta defining strategy. It was mainly just like sort of gimmick or like maybe tier 2-ish type decks at best. So your intuition was correct. This card is like, it's very gimmicky. As like a kid, you might read this and be like, yeah, I can summon Blue Eyes with this because no one's going to call level 8, right? But when you try to apply this to like actual like card game theory, it's not particularly good. It's a very funny card though.
Yeah, I have a phrase that I've been picking up recently. It's called, this card is like Disneyland, where like
exactly
moment,
that's a good
like,
one. That's a good one.
If you think about going to Disneyland, this card's the fucking nuts. But like often outside of Disneyland, it's just really bad.
All right, here's the next one for you. We're actually going to get into a monster. We haven't had any monsters yet. I've just been showing you spells and traps. So a little bit of text on this card, but not too bad.
So this could be normal summoned. That's important to know. This card cannot be special summoned. This card returns to the owner's hand during the end phase of the turn that it is normal summoned, flip summoned, or flipped face up. When this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent's life points, your opponent skips his/her next draw phase. Stopping draw in Yu-Gi-Oh! Was this printed before or after Pot of Greed was banned? Actually, I guess it was at the same time.
Pot of Greed was in the first set for context. So
when was Pot of Greed banned?
Pot of Greed was banned, I want to say, in 2005.
Oh, okay. So they
3 years after its release. Yeah.
Skipping your next draw phase seems really good. If I played a minion that stopped my opponent's next draw phase, majority of the time that is kind of irrelevant because there's gonna be other ways for my opponent to draw cards. Now, like sometimes, yeah, like stopping a draw. Don't get me wrong, drawing cards in card games is like probably the most important thing. You need cards.
That's why we play card games, right? To draw a card.
that could be, I guess, really strong. I guess if you're going first and then you play this, it is somewhat relevant, but not really. The thing is, in Hearthstone currently, there's too many draw effects where this card would not see any play.
And think about modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Remember, this is what we're going based off here. And think about your Sword Soul deck and how much you could you can search, right? Drawing is one thing for Hearthstone, but Yu-Gi-Oh! We have all the search effects too.
Why would this ever be played? But also, why would this is kind of metagaming it? But why would you show me this if it's that bad?
Like to fuck with you? I mean, quite frankly,
fair. That is fair. Why would I play this? Because this takes up your normal summon too,
and it bounces back to your hand, so you don't even get to keep it on the field.
And if you're going first, you don't even get to hit your opponent, right? So like you actually have to make this as like a flipped, I guess, play, just so it doesn't just go back to your hand. Unless you want the card to go back to your hand. Is there a card that interacts with cards going back to your hand? But like that doesn't seem like a Yu-Gi-Oh! Type effect. Like I can see that in Hearthstone. Like if a card is bounced back to your hand, get +1/+1. But like that sounds awful too. Why would I want to do that? I can't see a world where this is good. I'm just trying to picture a world where it is like in Disneyland. Where would I want to be doing? Going second, this is whatever. I guess you get to swing first. Or you get to swing going second. So like I get to attack directly if this gets to attack. But I'm taking out my normal summon. Why would I want to stop my opponent's draw phase when I could do something extremely more powerful? There's nothing. There's nothing. No, there's nothing. This is bad. This has to be bad. There's no way this is good, dude. No, bad. Bad.
Final answer.
Final answer. This is.
I'm crying over here. Oh my god. Let me set the stage for you.
Oh
Aaron.
god. That's
Okay?
what this is what CGV says before he tells me I'm wrong.
This is a card that has traumatized any person who has played this game pre 2005, I want to say.
Okay.
There is something infamously known as the Yada lock, and as it would imply, that is Yada in Yata-Garasu. So basically what would happen is, in very simplified caveman Yu-Gi-Oh!, anytime there would be an open board, say with one of the previous ban cards like Giant Trunade or something like that, if you summon Yada, poke your opponent, the damage is irrelevant, you bring the card back to your hand, your opponent skips their draw. You're going to see a draw next turn. So you're always going to be like, denying your opponent the draw is sort of like giving you a +1, but like in reverse, right?
Right.
So effectively, your opponent's only going to have so many resources to work with. Let's say then they go like summon a monster or set a monster past the turn. You can then destroy that monster with a spell card or trap card, let's say, and then summon Yata-Garasu again, poke them. They don't get to draw anymore. Eventually, they're not going to have a hand. And eventually, that is going to implement what is known as the Yada lock, where you literally demonstrate a loop where you normal summon Yada, attack them, it goes back to hand, and you can just do that infinitely until you win the game, because they just can't draw for turn. They literally can't play the game. Many a Yu-Gi boomers have been absolutely traumatized by this because it is just one of the most oppressive mechanics imaginable. So, to no surprise, Yata-Garasu was banned very early on after its release, but it was recently unbanned. So it is no longer banned. So you are correct. This card is not banned because Yata-Garasu is just too hard to justify in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! When this card got announced that it was coming off the ban list, a lot of people were losing their mind just because it's a super unfair thing. We were looking at nostalgia and just how horrific this card interacted with the game. Justifying your normal summon on Yata-Garasu versus like anything else you could be doing in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Just wasn't worth it. There have been some decks that have tried to throw it in as like a gimmick, but it hasn't really gone too well. Yes, you are correct. It is not banned, but it has a very dark history throughout Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think it's funny you just like straight up thought it was not playable at all, because it's very strong in the right context, but by today's standards it's bad. By today's standards it's bad.
If you're asking me if this card would be playable in classic Hearthstone, I think maybe you can make the case for it, because
there wasn't as much draw power.
Yeah,
right?
so like just like Yu-Gi-Oh, Hearthstone actually has like an insane amount of draw power. Like it almost feels like the decks don't run out of cards in their hand, which is like an intentional design for the game. In classic Hearthstone, the draw for majority of classes was very bad. So if you put this on the board and you're constantly just stopping your opponent from drawing, eventually speaking, yeah, your opponent's going to run out of cards. The thing about Hearthstone compared to Yu-Gi-Oh though is your opponent will have minions on board to just hit your face after. Like they won't care about this card. Yeah, maybe you're denying the draw, but like if I'm killing you, what the fuck does it matter? Yu-Gi-Oh, it felt like back in the day, like you needed cards, especially for like your bigger cards, you have to like what's it called, like sacrifice them and stuff like. So you need the cards to actually do something like that. I just, even in like, I don't know if this is correct, but if you ask I think the average Hearthstone player has gotten infinitely better over 10 years. Like just
I'd say that with Yu-Gi-Oh too.
Yeah. So I wonder if this card was just like the average player just was like kind of trolling, and they're like, oh wait a minute, this like I'm getting kind of fucking wrecked by this little bird. Like I don't want to, but as a design, this is atrocious. Like this, you don't want a card like this in your game. So if they're banning this purely from a play pattern experience, I 100% understand.
And that's why they did. It was it was not fun. Pretty good there. This one will be really interesting, man. We're doing all the old cards today. We got another monster for you. A little bit of text. Not too bad, though. Not too bad.
See, I also remember the art of this card. Magical Scientist. Okay, so normal summon as well. Pay 1,000 life points to special summon one level 6 or lower fusion monster from your fusion deck and face up attack or defense position. That fusion monster cannot attack your opponent's life points directly. is returned to your fusion deck at the end of the turn.
So for context, for older Yu-Gi-Oh, Fusion deck is now the extra deck because there's only Fusion summoning as a mechanic. So if this were in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, this would be, if it was printed again, let's say for modern Yu-Gi-Oh, it would be in the extra deck instead. I'm giving you the very first printing of this card.
Okay, so just so I remember correctly, your extra deck is like
15 cards.
Yeah, the 15 like big boys often that you put into the side so you can special summon them on the board at some point. Like I'm talking like Baron's one of those cards, right?
Level 6 or lower. Now, let me ask you a question. Can I sacrifice that monster if I special summon it?
It doesn't say you can't.
I mean, I've been playing a lot of card games, and I'm sure you have too. And the best thing in every card game is mana cheating. And I don't know what you would call it in this case, but like card cheating is probably what I would refer to it as. If this was in Hearthstone, yeah, I'm paying 1,000 life points to do this, almost guaranteed. Because like, even if it's just a really good effect at the end of turn that does something spectacular and it goes back, I think that's more than fine. And you get to keep the dude, which is, I guess, okay. So that seems, and you're not losing that much life. This could be like a Warlock card, almost guaranteed. Probably see play.
He looks like a Warlock. Let's be honest.
He does. And then in Yu-Gi-Oh, it's arguably even better because if you pull something out of your extra deck and then you do its thing and then you sacrifice it, like it's like you didn't really lose anything, and like the 1,000 life points is pretty negligible in the grand scheme of a game. I can't think, again, this is like the reverse of like how do I talk myself not thinking this is good, but I don't see a way this would not be playable. I would maybe if this was that good of an effect, I could see it being banned, but I'm not 100% sure if it would be. But this seems very.
So you think it's a good card? You think it's a good card, but you're on the fence as to whether or not it's banned.
If I'm thinking about Sword Soul, like I have to do a whole song and dance to get a couple of my boys out. Like this is just play this and you get one. I think this is very good. I don't think it's banned. I can see it being banned though if during the context of when this was released, this is like the best thing you could do in every single deck.
So you think it's good but not banned, just to clarify. So one thing you may have overlooked here is that, again, like a lot of these old Yu-Gi-Oh cards, Magical Scientist does not have a once per turn clause on it.
Oh, fuck, you're right.
You are able to pay 7,000 life points, if you would like, to summon 7 fusion monsters to the field. Now, you might be wondering why you would do that, because you only have 5 monster slots, right? So you can't even actually really do anything with that. Funny you ask, Raren, because there's a little card here I'm going to show you. And let's see if you can piece this one together. I'm going to send you this card here. Why don't you read this one for us?
Wait, now that you say that, that is like, wait, Magical Scientist is like the best card I've ever seen. I'm pretty sure. Wait, that card's fucked. Offer one monster on your side of the field that's tribute to inflict direct damage equal to half of the tribute's monster attack to your opponent's life points. Monsters used for a tribute summon or that are offered as tributes due to other cards effects are excluded. Monsters used for a tribute summon. Oh, okay. Yeah, broken.
So
yeah, it's not what's returned, so you just win.
Right. So this is known as the Magical Scientist FTK. So basically, all you would need is effectively 2 cards. You would just need Magical Scientist and a way to, well, actually, let me go back. You would just need to find any way to get a Magical Scientist and a Catapult Turtle on your board, which there were a plethora of back in the day. So all you would have to do is, once you assemble these 2 monsters on the field, is pay for Magical Scientist for 1,000 life points. You would summon a level 6 fusion monster that would have 2,100 attack points. There were only a few in the game that actually had that stat number, but there was just enough to make this work. You would sacrifice it to the Catapult Turtle, and you deal half that monster's attack to your opponent. So half of 2,100 is 1,050. You would repeat that 7 more times to deal 7,500-ish damage to your opponent. And Catapult Turtle conveniently says, rather, it doesn't say that it can't tribute itself. So you sack off the Magical Scientist for 150 and then Catapult Turtle for the remaining 500, and you deal just over 8,000 damage to your opponent in a single turn. This was one of Yu-Gi-Oh's first ever FTK decks, and Magical Scientist was banned not long after.
Wait, what year was that deck created in?
This was printed in 2003. So this is the second year Yu-Gi-Oh existed.
How is this game still alive, dude? What the? Imagine sitting down with one of your friends and they pull this shit on you. I would never touch this game ever again.
And the thing is, this combo has only gotten worse over time because Magical Scientist being a level 1 monster and being dark is just, there's so many ways to like get Magical Scientist on the field. I accidentally showed you the errata of Catapult Turtle where they made it only a hard once per turn. So that's one of the ways that they sort of circumvented that as well. But even if you just look at Magical Scientist in a vacuum, being able to just say, normal magical scientist, pay 1 million life points to summon 7 guys, and then link summon them into other guys, then, like, that's just so much free advantage. And granted, it costs a ton of your life points to do it. Some people could argue that maybe that's not good enough to see play today, but I don't think Konami wants to bring this off the list to find out, to be honest.
That's oh my god, that's so funny though. Oh my god.
There's also a lot of really strong level 6 or lower fusions in the game now that like have effects that could also do things to make this card even more oppressive than it already is. So I think this is a card that will never get unbanned. It's way too good.
Yeah, honestly, like, and I don't say this lightly, like this is arguably might be the best Yu-Gi-Oh card I've ever seen.
A lot of people feel that way.
Like,
a lot of people,
crazy.
like a lot of people think Scientist was a design mistake, just straight up.
Oh,
Like
100%. Oh yeah. That's nuts, dude. That's so okay. It's what a spectacular design. That's insane.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, we have our crazy cards too. Speaking of which, so we're talking about special summoning stuff out of the extra deck. Let's see what you think about this guy.
Oh,
much simpler effect.
Wait, I feel like I drafted this card when we did our video.
It's possible. It's very possible.
I remember looking at it because I read through the comments of that video, and it's made like an arena draft, right? So you showed me 3 cards, and I remember like this comparing to other 2 cards, and I was like, man, this one actually seems really good. Let me read this for though. All right, so Cyberstein, pay 5,000 life points, special summon 1 fusion monster from your fusion deck to the field in attack position. The attack and defense is relevant. I don't even read those. Okay, so I do remember this card, and I remember when I picked this card, I did it because when we're drafting for our extra deck, I was like, man, if I just high roll this card, I can just win the game. This is almost the same. I would imagine this is how that card was used majority of the time, because 5,000 life points is legitimately negligible if you win the game. That's what this card comes down to. Let me just think about this in Hearthstone real fast. When I pay, how much is this 5,000?
Would you pay 20 life to get like a card that theoretically wins you the game onto the field?
Yeah, I would. Actually, there's a card. The closest example we have to this, by the way, is Barnes. Do you remember Barnes?
I remember Barnes.
Yeah. So maybe not in standard. There's a card in Wild, which I will show you later, that allowed you basically this effect. Like, is would I pay this amount of life points to get that card on board immediately so I could win the game? Yeah, I would.
Sure.
So I would think that this is banned for almost the same context of the Scientist, because like this is awful to play against if you're second. Like if they could just win the game on turn 1, I would imagine.
So is that final answer?
That's final answer. I think it's banned.
You are correct.
Okay.
So let me give you the boomer context and then the modern context.
Okay.
So Cyberstein has had an interesting history throughout Yu-Gi-Oh! Because it was banned for a long time. It actually was unbanned once, maybe twice, but I'm pretty sure at the very least once, and then got rebanned because they realized it was a really bad idea. So the old boomer combo that a lot of people remember is, you'll probably recognize this card that I'm gonna send you here just because it's a classic. The Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon.
Yeah, I remember this card. Yeah.
The Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon has 4,500 attack points.
Yes.
So that is a lot of damage, right? Well, I'm going to show you this other card from back in the day called Megamorph. This is an equip spell. And why don't you read this one?
While your life points is lower than your opponent's, the equipped monster attack becomes double its original attack. While your life points is higher, the equipped monster attack becomes half its original attack. Oh, so it's like a 1-turn kill.
Yes. So you would pay 5, summon ultimate, equip Megamorph. It goes to 9,000 attack because you already paid the 5,000, so your life points are lower than your opponent's, and you just kill them. That's just the end of the game. If they have an open board or if you have a way to clear their monsters, you just kill them immediately. So this was so good that in the OCG, when this was first released, they stopped this combo from being legal after 6 days. Just because it was that bad. Now, for the TCG, this card was initially released to us as a prize card, so it was actually very hard to obtain until they actually reprinted it later on, just because of how historically relevant it was for the OCG. They wanted to just, I guess, honor its, heritage, I suppose. In modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, there's a lot more different ways that you can abuse this card, let's say. So one crazy thing you can do with this is that there is a monster called Reaperdocus. I'm not going to show it to you. I'm just going to give you the TLDR here. Reaperdocus has an ability that the monster that it's pointing to, it can change the type of that monster. So you can change Cyberstein from being a machine type monster into a psychic type monster. Now, why is that relevant, you might ask? There's an equip spell called Telekinetic Charging Cell. This card reads, you equip it to a psychic monster, which Cyberstein now is, and anytime you would pay the cost for an effect of a psychic type monster, you don't have to pay the cost. So Hypothetically, if you turn your Cyber Sign into a psychic monster, you now have a 0 life point cost to special summon anything out of your extra deck on a non-once per turn type effect. And some of the best things that you can summon out with this card is a card called Naturia Exterio, which the TLDR on this card is that basically anytime your opponent activates a spell or trap, you just banish a card from the graveyard and negate it. So you shut down their entire ability to use spells and traps. There's also other cards that prevent you from using monster effects. There's one that prevents you from summoning monsters, period. So you can basically assemble whatever board you want with Cyberstein, doing these crazy, ridiculous over-the-top combos, and they unbanned Cyberstein. People figured this shit out, and they're like, okay, you're going back on the ban list, and he's been back on there ever since. There's like 40 different Cyberstein combos that basically resulted in you winning the game immediately, and they're just like, okay, this is not okay.
Yeah, mana cheating's pretty good.
Yeah,
or whatever you want to call it in Yu-Gi-Oh. What do you guys call it in Yu-Gi-Oh? Just like cheating?
I mean, yeah, pretty much. I mean, we do that all the time. All right, so next card is only a few left here. Another simple one for you. I decided to give you a break here.
Royal Tribute. This card can only be activated when your Necro Valley is active on the field. Both players must discard all monsters cards in their hand to the graveyard.
And I do have Necro Valley for you. I will basically, the TLDR on this, it's just a field spell, so it stays active. You could pretty much ignore all of the effect. It's pretty largely irrelevant. It's just you need this card on the field to use this.
See, this actually adds a little bit of an interesting qualm here, because you need 2 cards for this card to be effective rather than just basically on its own. But if it's there, discard all monster cards in their hand to the graveyard. I'm guessing it's possible, like turn 1 to go Necro Valley into Royal Tribute. Oh.
Now you're piecing it together.
I'm trying to ask myself, well, it's no longer a question of is this good? It's more of a question of how consistent can you get this? Opening hand, you win, like majority of the time. How do they even stop you? How do you even win the game if you have no monsters in your hand?
Well, here's the question. Would you play this in Hearthstone if this was legal?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm trying to think of what deck I would want it in, but yeah, I think, well, actually, hold on. This is actually...
I guess I should say this before you ask. Necro Valley does have a pretty relevant piece of text. Necro Valley, this card's undergone like 40 different erratas, so that's not helping. But basically, Necro Valley has an ability that cards in the graveyard cannot be moved out of the graveyard, essentially. So if you Royal Tribute, you both discard everything. But Necro Valley prevents the cards from like getting back onto the field or like getting moved out of the graveyard. So let's say Necro Valley just basically locks the cards there. Yeah, so that is, I guess, somewhat relevant.
This is in Hearthstone, actually, this card is substantially worse. The reason is because in Yu-Gi-Oh, you play your monsters first and then you play this, and then your opponent's fucked. Where like in Hearthstone, you have to spend the mana to play your minions, which means if you're doing this, you're not actually developing anything past it unless you're playing like an all spell deck, which is, depending on what class this would be in, it would be rough to actually make this work. In Yu-Gi-Oh, because you can play this after you summon all your monsters, this is disgusting. Like, it is, your opponent can't play the game and you just win. It's like the bird, but like with spells. Like, what do they do?
Pretty much.
I would imagine if this was consistent enough, again, it's really difficult to tell because you need both of these cards. Because I can't imagine that Royal Tribute's a playable card without Necro Valley. Necro Valley might be still playable without Royal Tribute, but if we're counting these 2 cards as like one thing, how consistently can you get both in your opening hand? I'm sure there's cards to search for it, so it's probably pretty consistent. Which makes me think,
if you want a little bit of a hint, this archetype has received several waves of support over the years.
Okay, so over time, it's become an absolute problem. I would almost guarantee. Okay.
Maybe not. Maybe I'm just saying, when you're talking about how searchable the cards may or may not be, I'm just giving you a little bit of insight that, especially as we've gotten to modern Yu-Gi-Oh, there have been several waves of support that this archetype has received.
Man, it's just in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh, I think this is even worse. Like, I feel like you really need monsters to win the game. I would think that it's good. I would imagine if this one's very difficult because contextually speaking, I don't know how likely you are to get this in your first, like your opening hand. Like even if you're going first, if I have to do I guess a prefix to this. If consistently you can get this combo in your opening hand, they would probably ban this card. Not even if it's broken, just from a play pattern standpoint, because it just nukes like probably half the decks, if not more, in the game. And then you're not having any fun. So I'd imagine that this is probably, if this is consistently available in your opening hand, very good and probably banned.
Final answer?
Yeah.
This card is not banned.
Oh,
for the reasons that you mentioned. I believe it has been limited and maybe semi-limited, but it's never been banned. But it's like you said, it is a bit of an I wouldn't say it's inconsistent, but it is not like you're not going to be, even if you play 3 of this card, there's not a super high likelihood that you're going to pull this off, because then you only have like a 40% chance to open this in your opening hand, and that gets lower if you need to pair it with Necro Valley. It's for the exact reason that you mentioned. This card is very oppressive. Basically, if someone does this to you, you just want to like punch them in the face, because it's like, well, this is a non-game, basically. And back in the day when people would do this to you, it was awful. Because like you said, especially back in the day, needing monsters was super relevant, but it was never bad enough back in the day that it warranted this card to get hit in a significant capacity. They did slightly hit it, but again, it wasn't like the best thing you could be doing. And even though with over time, this archetype got more and more support cards, you were still never really consistently able to like resolve this in any meaningful way. It's funny, you did say that Necro Valley would see play even without Royal Tribute. It does, as a matter of fact. It's a card that is still sideboarded to this very day.
Yo, I'm kind of a master, dude. I just started off wrong, right?
Well, we'll see if you're a master with these last few here, because we got the heavy hitters for the last few. What do you think about this card?
Oh, God. Just the name. Okay. Reversal Quiz.
This is a very Yu-Gi-Oh card.
Oh, no, I'm actually excited. Send all cards in your hand and on your side of the field to the graveyard. Call the type of card, spell, trap, or monster on top of your deck. If you call it right, exchange your current life points with your opponent's current. What the fuck? Why would you ever do this? Send all cards in your hand and on your side of the field to the graveyard. This is almost like a red herring, because I feel like the second effect is irrelevant. You actually might just play this for the first line. Send all cards to your hand. Well, hand and your side of the field to the graveyard. I feel like that's a very promising effect in Yu-Gi-Oh! And Hearthstone, that's garbage. But Yu-Gi-Oh! like you said, the graveyard's your second hand. So it's like, did you really lose anything? In Warlock, there's cards like, if this card is discarded, do this effect.
Okay.
And because
Yu-Gi-Oh! Has those too. I'll give you some hints.
So because in Hearthstone, that all happens in the same, like, the discard effects, if like, let's say it summons a minion on board, they would be on board after you played this. And then you get to look at the top card of your hand, or your deck, sorry. In Yu-Gi-Oh! If there's the same kind of principle and you get to interact with your graveyard, I feel like this card is actually a lot better than it seems. Contextually speaking, like, depending on what you could do with this card, it actually seems not that bad. I don't know what you would do with the second thing, because it's really hard to imagine swapping your life points really is relevant for a card like this, but maybe it is. Maybe it gives you enough like life to actually do something the following turn, or maybe you need the life points to like cheat out some more stuff. I'm not too sure, but I could actually see this card being good in Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm gonna say it's fine.
Okay.
I have no idea if it's banned. It is impossible for me to actually guess, but maybe it is. Maybe it's really good.
You gotta guess one or the other. You gotta guess one or the other.
I'm gonna truly think that this card is actually very good. I'm gonna say it's banned as well. I feel like this is like a weird form of mana cheating that reads really odd, but like it actually ends up being very strong in practice.
This was really interesting to like hear you evaluate this card, just as someone who has like limited knowledge of Yu-Gi-Oh! So let me set the stage for you, okay? Reversal Quiz is a very funny card. It's a very memey, like old school type of card that you would, you'd see people play with on the playground all the time. There's a couple combo pieces here that I need to show you. So the first one is an old card called Royal Magical Library. This is a monster that says anytime a spell is active, you place a counter on it. And if there's 3 counters on this card, you remove all 3 to draw a card. Basically, this revolves around an entire combo that is called Library FTK. So basically, your deck comprises of 3 libraries, maybe 1 or 2 other monsters, but for the most part, it's 3 libraries and 37 spell cards. Basically, every third of a card you play is going to draw you a card. You're probably wondering with Reversal Quiz how you're going to be able to correctly guess the type of card that's on top of your deck. Well, there's this other card called Convulsion of Nature. This is the most Yu-Gi-Oh! Card ever. That is a continuous spell that says both players flip their decks upside down and basically play like that. So your deck is literally upside down. You can see the top card of your deck is now face up and was like basically at the bottom, but now it's the top. There's also a card called Archfiend's Oath. Archfiend's Oath reads, you pay 500 life points, declare the name of the top card of your deck, and if you're correct, you get to add it to your hand. So with this little combination here, you know the top card of your deck, Archfiend's Oath, you basically just get to add cards to your hand for free because you know that you're able to do this. And these cards are both unlimited. So you could play 3 copies of Archfiend Oath, 1, 2, 3, declare the top 3 cards of your deck because you know them, and add 3 cards to your hand. Your trigger, while you're doing this, you're getting counters on library and drawing additional cards. Now, you might remember the card from earlier in this episode, Giant Trunade. Trunade says you can return all cards, all spells and traps on the field to the hand.
Yeah.
So you can bounce back these Archfiend Oaths to your hand and basically not only get more counters on your library, because these are all spell cards, you can redeclare by paying 500 life points, adding more cards to your hand. So effectively, this is a roundabout way to essentially draw your entire deck, but simultaneously, you're draining your life points 500 times for every Archfiend's Oath. And there's ways to recycle all of these cards in this deck as well that I'm not going to go into. So you can basically activate them like infinite number of times. Essentially, your goal is to get your life points 500 or lower. And then the final piece of the puzzle, besides, of course, the reversal quiz, is a card called Black Pendant. Black Pendant is an equipped spell that when it's sent to the graveyard, it deals 500 damage to your opponent. So once your life points are at 500 or lower, you activate Pendant, equip it to your library, and then you activate Reversal Quiz. Since the Convulsion of Nature is revealing the top card of your deck, you're always going to call it correctly. You then swap life points with your opponent and destroy everything on the field. That triggers the Black Pendant to deal 500 damage to your opponent, and they're at 500 or less life points, so you automatically win the game.
What a story that was. Jesus Christ.
Now, in terms of modern Yu-Gi-Oh, that's terrible. You're never going to actually fucking resolve that. And in terms of old Yu-Gi-Oh, this is still questionable as to whether or not this is like actually really that good. It's very much like a meme gimmick deck that you could play. And by modern standard, there's way too many ways to interact with this that this would never actually happen. But you're getting a history lesson on very dumbass Yu-Gi-Oh combos. That and this was also legal like in 2003. So Yu-Gi-Oh just had FTKs from the get-go. It was great. It was a great time.
Wait, so this card has never been banned as far as the way you just described, and it was not. It was not very good, but it had something to be playable in.
Yeah, so basically, because Giant Trunade was banned and or limited, depending on when you're looking at it, that really stopped this deck from comboing off, because having Giant Trunade to keep bouncing the Archfiend Oaths back to hand was like one of the limiting factors, because you needed to be able to keep lowering your life points and adding cards to your hand. So since Giant Trunade was not something you could consistently rely on later on in Yu-Gi-Oh, that really made this deck basically unplayable. That's why I was laughing at the way you were evaluating this and talking about, yeah, you can destroy your whole board, you can discard your hand. Like, I don't blame you. Like, that's like, especially modern brain, that kind of like, I was like, that's actually interesting. I mean, I don't think it's good, but you know. The Warlock thing was funny though too, because like I could see that argument. Yeah.
It's just tough because I truly don't understand how good it is to just remove all your hand and board. Like maybe there is some whack ass card that I just don't know of that actually enables this to be broken. And maybe in the future too, right? But like it just depends on what they want to, I guess, create in the game. It's a cool card though.
All right.
Cool card.
Last couple. We're going to do one of the most iconic Yu-Gi-Oh monsters ever.
Okay.
There's a lot of text on this guy. I'm going to warn you.
Blackluster Soldier, Envoy of the Beginning. So this is a warrior. Okay, this card can only be special summoned by removing 1 light and 1 dark monster in your graveyard from play. I guess that means to just banish them from the graveyard.
Correct, banish. Yeah, this is older text. Yeah.
Once during each of your turns, you could select and activate one of the following effects. Remove 1 monster on the field from play. If you activate this effect, this card cannot attack during this turn. If this card is destroyed, your opponent's monster as a result of battle. If this card destroyed your opponent's monster as a result of battle, it can attack once again in a row. Whoa. Okay, in a row, that means like the monster behind it.
So it can attack either another monster, or if your opponent doesn't have any monsters, it can attack them directly. It just gets 2 attacks if it kills something in battle. And 3,000 attack, 2,500 defense.
And this wouldn't be in your like extra deck. This is like your main.
This is a main deck card. This is a main deck card.
It remind me to actually play this, like to sacrifice it. It's 2 monsters.
So you're banishing it from the graveyard. So you're not using any of your cards in your hand or on the field.
I'm so sorry. Graveyard. You're right. This card can only be special summoned. Yeah, you're right. Sorry. I was looking at the stars, like you could like sacrifice.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So I think for the majority of this, we're talking about the 2 effects in the attack probably are the most relevant things, because this is the first time you've actually brought up the attack, which means that this is a relevant thing because 3,000, I would imagine at the time this was printed, was pretty big, Can you confirm?
I mean, I still think that's big by modern standards, to be fair.
Okay, so there's a lot of, if this is an attack position, there's not a lot of cards that can actually go toe to toe with a monster like this. I would imagine like when this was released, especially that was the case. So removing one monster from the field of play, but if you do this, this card can't attack during this. Once during each of your turns. What does that mean? Like, can you do this on your opponent?
It's just old wording. It's just once per turn. You get to do one
on your side, on your turn.
On your turn, yeah, okay. Yeah. It's not a quick effect. It's not a quick effect. That would be that would be insane.
I'm glad we clarified that because that I was gonna be like, this is broken for sure. Remove one monster on the field from play. I mean, it's the thing about this card is like it's just good because regardless of how I can't imagine that getting rid of one light, one dark is that hard. Like it seems pretty self-explanatory, especially in like Yu-Gi-Oh standards. There's so many ways to actually move cards to your graveyard. So like that seems pretty self-explanatory. This is like, can I beat the monster that's in front of me? No. Okay, I'm just gonna remove it and I'll attack next turn. Oh, I can deal with all the monsters on my opponent's side. Okay, I'll just attack. Like that's very good to have such a versatile minion, especially probably in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh. Like Blue Eyes White Dragon has no text on it, right? It's just like a monster.
Correct. It's a vanilla. Yep.
Yeah, so you just remove it and then you worry about something else, and they probably spent their whole turn playing that. So I have to imagine this card's actually pretty decent. In modern,
I mean, it has Blue Eyes stats, so.
Oh, this is actually what Blue Eyes stats is? Okay. Early days of Yu-Gi-Oh! It's probably really good. I can't imagine in current Yu-Gi-Oh! This is like insane though. I guess what you would do is you would play your own after your opponent plays theirs, and then they're crying. Then like,
so I guess put it in Hearthstone context too, right? Would you banish, or what is it, Abyss? Would you Abyss 2 minions to summon a 10/10 that can either Abyss one of your opponent's creatures or attack twice for 0 mana?
Second one, maybe not. The first one, maybe. This one's tough because the way that so you'd have to spend mana to play those minions, and then they have to die, and then you have to special summon this, which is like a lot longer.
Unless you get them to their grave other ways.
In Hearthstone, for the grand scheme of how it works, like the minions have to die in order for you to proc this effect. That's what the way I'm thinking. In Yu-Gi-Oh, that's not the case, right? We just fucking saw what is the card called? Reversal Quiz. Right? So like that's where my brain was with that card. Like there's so many ways for you to interact with the graveyard that it almost feels like that is not a difficult thing to do. In the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh, I have to imagine this is powerful. So I assume this is a good card. I don't know if it's banned. I don't think it's banned. I think there's much more egregious stuff to be worried about. But just as a minion, this is probably good.
So final answer?
Final answer, yeah.
To no surprise, this card was definitely banned back in the day.
Okay.
For all the reasons you mentioned, like this stat line on something that could bring itself out to the field for free, this was a game ender. Basically, you drop this as soon as you saw lethal, and your opponent just really didn't have anything they could do about it most of the time. Or you dropped it maybe if you were in like a desperate position and you needed to try to fight for the board back, or you just needed to like, you just wanted to control the game, because you could bring this guy out like in defense mode and just once per turn banish something that your opponent plays every single turn. So it's basically like a floodgate in that regard, right? It's very oppressive if you use it that way. But typically it's a game ender. So it's banned for old Yu-Gi-Oh! For new Yu-Gi-Oh! It is not banned. It's actually at 3. Which is like, it's crazy as like an old Yu-Gi-Oh player to say that, because this card, like this card's legacy is actually just crazy. Like when you see this card hit the field, like you just know the game's over. It's like a Leroy Jenkins again type of thing. But by modern days, it's like you said, it's not like the most egregious thing you could be doing. It's like, it's cool. Some decks have thrown it in every now and then, but nothing like too recently. It's just a good card. It's just a very good card. And if your deck can play it and it makes sense, like you would. And that brings us to the last card, which has a fitting name, considering I said it's the last card. Buckle up. This probably has the most text of any card we've read so far, but I think it's a very fitting end.
All right. Holy moly, man. Last turn? Okay. Hold on. I got to open up. All right. This card can only be activated during your opponent's turn when your life points are 1,000 or less. Select one monster on your side of the field and send all other cards on the field into the respective owner's hands. All other cards on the field and in their respective owner's hand to their respective graveyard. So you're ripping every card from existence here. Your opponent must then special summon one monster from their deck in face-up attack position and attack your selected monster. Any battle damage from this battle is treated as 0. The player whose monster remains alone on the field at the end phase of this turn wins the duel.
So the short of this is, basically, this is like the climax Dragon Ball Z episode, where it is your monster versus your opponents. It's like the art on the card. You're beating the shit out of each other, and whoever's the last man standing wins the duel.
I am trying to imagine. Wait, Hearthstone. Let me think about this for a second.
It's sort of okay. So it's not really that good. It's sort of like Brawl if Brawl won you the game if it resolved.
Yeah. So I'm really glad the Hearthstone team doesn't make cards like that, because that would be fucking awful. Your opponent must then special summon. Do they get to pick their monster?
They do.
And then you have to have a monster already on your side of the field.
And you need 1,000 life points or less.
So do they get to scroll through their deck?
They do.
They get to pick one. Okay, so
correct. So you activate the card, everything goes to grave from the field and hand except the monster, and then your opponent goes through their deck and picks any monster and summons it, and then they battle, and whichever one wins that battle wins the game.
Are there monsters in this game that are like, this card can't die in a battle? Like, there has to be, right? And those apply to
maybe
this? Those apply to
maybe
this. So
maybe
if that's the word. I would have to imagine that you're playing this in a deck where the monster that you're picking has to have one of the following lines on it. It can't lose in battle. If this is in battle, it automatically wins. Like, I don't know what the line is. Like in Hearthstone, there's like poisonous, right? So like it would kill the monster regardless.
We don't have a keyword for it, but there are cards that do that. Yes.
Okay. So I would imagine that this is what you're playing this for, because this actually seems like a super meme card, but you can make games just end in your favor with this card. Like, you've shown me cards already that is like lowers your life points so you could play this. So, but like, this is such an interesting design.
Interesting is one word for it. That's for sure.
I'm just trying to like, it's such a, I think in theory it's a really cool card, but I think it often ends up being pretty like degenerate.
This is a Yu-Gi-Oh card far and away.
Yeah.
Like no other card game, I'm sorry, would have a card like this. This is only Yu-Gi-Oh could do something like this.
No, there's 100%. Well, it's even worse in other games, I'm pretty sure, because like just how they design cards, at least like there's
exactly.
This is
Do you think this is good? Do you think this is good? That's a good place to start.
You see, it's impossible, because it could be really good. Like, if the cards are there to allow this to be degenerate, it's insane. Like, that's the line, right? Like, it's either the best card in the game or it's the worst card in the game. Like, that's what it comes down to. It just
better than Magical Scientist? You said Magical Scientist is the best Yu-Gi-Oh card you've ever read.
Yeah, but Magical Scientist, doesn't it help with this? Hold on. You go okay, no, actually, not the theory craft for this. Hold on. No, but Magical Scientist. Okay, yeah. Magical Scientist, you pay 1,000 life points, right? So then you use Magical Scientist to lower your life points, so then you can play last turn with a minion that you want to summon from the Magical Scientist, and then you win the game. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's shit like that that makes me believe that this kind of effect could be really broken. And it's just waiting for that critical mass of cards in order for this card to be like insane. So I honestly believe throughout 20 years of Yu-Gi-Oh, or whatever it is at this point, that there has been a point where this card has been disgusting, and I think it's very good in this man. That's my final
answer.
That's my
you
final,
sure?
Yeah.
This is your last one, Rare, and you're positive?
Yeah. 100%. It has to be broken at some point.
So, where do I start with last turn? Where do I start with this card? You are correct with last turn that like there's a critical mass of cards that you would think that would like essentially make this card like a combo piece to just like cheese your opponent. So you mentioned Magical Scientist, which I think was very good, and that's why I put it earlier before I put last turn, just so you might be able to make that connection. There is another card I'll quickly show you that you don't need Magical Scientist to necessarily get your life points lower. There's this other card called Wall of Revealing Light, which just says you can pay any multiple of 1,000 life points so that your opponent can't declare attacks with monsters. The fact that they can't declare an attack is irrelevant with last turn because it'll be destroyed before last turn resolves. So that's the only purpose of this card is to get your life points to 1,000. And this also doesn't use a summon either, like Magical Scientist does. So this was typically the way people would get their life points down to 1,000 from 8,000 if they were trying to meme with this card. Now, the card that was typically combined with last turn is not a card that can't be destroyed by battle or has some sort of poison effect, but rather it is a card called Jowgen the Spiritualist. This is another old card. And the only relevant part of this card's text is the last sentence that says, as long as this card remains face up on the field, no monster can be special summoned. So ideally, if you are able to open this 3-card combo, let's say, and there's other ways to do it, but this is the simple one. If you go Jowgen, set wall, set last turn. During your opponent's turn, you activate the wall, drain your life points down to 1,000. You activate last turn, and last turn, the way it resolves is you destroy everything, you keep your Jowgen on the field. Jowgen's effect is still active that prevents either player from special summoning a monster. Last turn attempts to resolve, but because the opponent is incapable of special summoning a monster, Jowgen is the only monster on the field, so you win the game. So that is typically what is known as like the last turn combo. However, that is not the reason that this card is banned. The reason this card is banned is because it's a fucking headache for so many reasons, because it is a super old fucking card that never actually resolves the way that it's supposed to. And more often than not, it will probably end in a draw. And Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a very anti-draw game. A lot of cards that do anything to force a draw have been banned or errated to prevent that from happening. This card is so complicated. I'm going to show you this. This card is so fucking complicated. There is a 16-page document that details how this card is supposed to resolve. And in cases of like different cards, what you are supposed to do and how last turn is supposed to resolve. This is every single ruling that has to do with last turn interacting with different cards and effects, and how this would ultimately like result in last turn resolving as a card. And so basically, Konami just said, fuck this. This card is way too complicated for us to like actually care about like resolving in any capacity. So they just decided to ban it, and it's been banned ever since.
Yeah, it's probably for the best.
So it's banned because it's just a pain in the ass. It's not banned because it's good necessarily.
It's interesting. See, it's funny. Like when we did the last video on my channel, where I was talking like, does a card get banned or not? Right? I don't think the Hearthstone developers really want to look at Wild when they design new cards, because it's like, why would they give a shit about this? Yu-Gi-Oh! They have to, because they're all in one format, right? So that's like, that's hilarious. It's funny that there's that huge block of text of like, yeah, this is what happens. And I guess they don't update it anymore, right? Because there's no point.
Pretty much, yeah. Like, so basically any time we have ever done a video regarding like anything to do with last turn, the video always ends with us looking at the document to figure out how the card resolves. It is notorious. It is that bad because depending on the monsters that are on the field or anything that's like resolving or triggering when it happens, there's always a different outcome. It never resolves the same. It's just so stupid, but it makes for very entertaining content, which is why I thought it'd be a great way to end the video with you today.
It's a cool card. Really cool card.
Yeah, it's a neat card, and the art's pretty sick too. It's just two giant things beating the shit out of each other. So good job though. I'd say like overall you got like half of them right. So that's pretty good. That's like barely passing, you know?
Thanks, man.
I hope you had fun. You now understand how Magical Scientist is the craziest Yu-Gi-Oh card ever printed. So I'm proud I taught you something. So guys, that's going to wrap it up for another video. I really hope you all enjoy. Let's go ahead and shout the patrons for all of their continued support. So shout to Shout1317, Tim00x3, MBT Play Medolce, Moto, Cameron L. Smith, Phoenix the Immortal, Pony Stark, The Synchro Guy, Dan the Man Hoban, Little Fade Leaf, Draconic, Dylan Rare Hunter, JW11860, Extremely Vulgar Man, Brody Eastwood, Flannel Daddy, Chrono the Branded Enjoyer, Twinkle Muncher, Matthew Brady, Uncle Brian of Stardust, Power Rave, both out a stupidly long name that barely makes any sense and is annoying to read out loud, Cheeks McLapperty, Stolfin Amethyst, Wonder Waffle, MBT cancel by all community soon, cancel by all committee soon, cancel by all players soon, Nicholas Carpenter, Corvain, Calvin Tempest, RIP Akira Toriyama, Daniel Howell, and Life Keeps Using Solemn Judgment on my hopes and dreams. Thank you all so much for watching, and we will see you next time.